The thing Clint Eastwood would change if he could go back to age 30 isn't what anyone expects. Not the films he didn't make, not the investments he missed, not the political statements he regrets, or the roles he turned down, not even the marriages that failed, or the children he disappointed. No. What haunts him at 94, what wakes him in the dark hours before dawn, what he would trade every award and every accolade to undo, is something far more fundamental, something that shaped everything that came after, something that cost him the one thing money can't buy back. On the afternoon of March 15, 1960, a young Clint Eastwood stood at a crossroads he didn't recognize as a crossroads. He made a choice in 60 seconds that would echo through 60 years, a choice so small, so seemingly insignificant, that he didn't think about it again for decades, until it was far too late. But to understand what he would change, you first need to understand what that choice cost him. And to understand that, you need to know about the phone call he received 38 years later. The phone call that made him realize what he'd lost, what he'd sacrificed without even knowing he was sacrificing it. This is the story of the one thing Clint Eastwood would change, and why it matters more than anything else he's ever done. March 15th, Los Angeles, a struggling actor's apartment. At age 30, Clint Eastwood was nobody, or close to it. Small roles in forgotten films. Television work that paid the bills but built no legacy. Auditions that led nowhere. The kind of career that looked like it was going somewhere only to people who didn't know better. He'd been working steadily since the mid-50s, but steadily didn't mean successfully. He was a face in the background, a name in small print, the kind of actor whose friends back home asked, "Seen you in anything lately?" with that particular tone that meant they knew the answer was probably no. But on that March afternoon, everything was about to change, though not in the way he expected. The phone rang twice before he answered. His agent, excited, almost breathless. There was a meeting. Tomorrow. A producer named Bernard something. European money backing a Western series. Something about Italy. The details were unclear, the agent admitted, but it was a lead role. Actual money. Potential. Tomorrow at 3, his agent said. Don't be late.
Clint hung up and stared at the calendar on his kitchen wall. Tomorrow, March 6th.
And there, circled in red pen, was another notation, one he'd made 3 weeks earlier, one he'd almost forgotten about. His father's birthday dinner in Piedmont up north. His mother had called, had asked specifically, "Your father's turning 65. It would mean a lot if you were there, all of us together." The choice formed in his mind with brutal simplicity, career or family. The meeting that might change everything, or the dinner that would please his parents. At 30 years old, standing in that cramped Los Angeles apartment with the phone still warm in his hand, Clint Eastwood made his decision. He chose the meeting. He called his mother, made an excuse, a scheduling conflict, work commitment. He'd make it up to them. He'd visit soon. He promised. She said she understood. Her voice carried that particular resignation that parents develop when their children's lives pull them away. "Your father will be disappointed," she said, "but he'll understand. Work is work." The meeting happened. The series became Rawhide. Rawhide led to Italy. Italy led to The Man with No Name. The Man with No Name led to everything else. Stardom, directing, legacy. The career he'd dreamed about materialized because he chose that meeting over that dinner. Success justified the choice, or so he told himself for decades. But 38 years later, another phone call changed everything. Clint Eastwood at 68, Academy Award-winning director. Icon, legend. The career had gone exactly as he'd hoped, and better. He was at his ranch in Carmel when his phone rang. His sister, her voice tight with something between anger and grief. "Did you know?" she asked. "Know what?" "About Dad, about what he said that night at his birthday dinner. The one you missed." Clint felt something cold settle in his chest. "What are you talking about?" His sister had been going through their father's things. He'd passed away years earlier. But she'd finally gotten around to sorting through boxes in the attic, and she'd found something, a journal. Their father had kept a journal. He wrote about that night, his sister said, about his 65th birthday, about you not being there. Clint waited. He wrote that he understood, that you had a career to build, But then he wrote something else, something he never told anyone. The pause stretched long enough that Clint thought the connection had dropped. He'd been diagnosed 2 weeks before the party. Early-stage cancer, treatable but serious. He and Mom had decided not to tell anyone until after the birthday dinner. They didn't want to worry us. They wanted one last normal celebration before everything changed. Clint's world tilted. He wrote that he'd planned to tell you that night, after dinner. He wanted to talk to you specifically, man to man, about life, about what matters, about things he'd never said. He wrote that he was looking forward to it more than anything else about the party. The silence on the line became physical, oppressive. And then you called to cancel. And he wrote, his sister's voice broke. He wrote that he understood that work was important, but he also wrote that he'd lost his courage to bring it up later, that the moment had passed, that he'd planned to tell you everything that night, and when you weren't there, he couldn't figure out how to say it over the phone. So he never did. Clint stood in his ranch house, successful and acclaimed and hollow. He lived another 12 years, his sister continued. But he never had that conversation with you, the one he'd been planning, the one he'd been rehearsing. And I think he died wishing he had. The call ended, but the revelation didn't. For days afterward, Clint couldn't stop thinking about what his father had written. The journal entry his sister read to him, word for word, played in his mind on loop. Clint called today. Can't make dinner tomorrow. Work conflict. I told Helen it was fine, that I understood, but I'd been working up the courage for weeks to talk to him, really talk to him. Not about movies or money or success, about life, about the things I learned too late, about the mistakes I made that I see him making, about love and time and what actually matters when you're facing your own mortality. I wanted to tell him about the day I chose overtime at the plant instead of his Little League championship game, about how I told myself I was providing for the family, about how I convinced myself he'd understand, about how I never saw the look on his face when I didn't show up, but his mother did. And she told me about it, and I pretended it didn't matter because pretending was easier than facing what I'd done. I wanted to tell him that I see him making the same choices, choosing work over people, choosing career over connection, choosing to be successful over being present. And I wanted to warn him, because I'm 65 now and I've got cancer in my lungs, and I finally understand what I should have known at 30. Nobody on their deathbed wishes they'd worked more. But he's not coming tomorrow. And I understand work is work, opportunities matter. But I wonder if he'll understand someday when he's my age, when he looks back and counts the moments he missed, the conversations he didn't have, the people he loved but never told, the time he thought he had but didn't. I hope he learns it sooner than I did, but I'm not sure how to tell him. Not anymore. The moment's passed, so I'll just write it here and hope somehow he figures it out on his own. Reading those words decades later, Clint Eastwood understood what he'd lost. Not just a dinner, not just a birthday party, but the conversation that might have changed everything. The warning from a man who'd walked the same path and knew where it led. The wisdom earned through regret, offered too late to be received. His father had tried to save him from repeating his mistakes. But Clint hadn't been there to be saved. The realization led to a question that consumed him. What else had he missed? Clint began to count. Not his achievements, he'd done that plenty, but his absences, his missed moments, the times he chose work over people, and convinced himself it was justified. His first wife had once told him years into their marriage that she felt like she was raising their children alone. He'd been offended at the time, pointed to the house he'd bought, the security he'd provided, the opportunities his success had created, but now, looking back, he saw it differently. He'd been there for pregnancies, but missed first steps because of shooting schedules. He'd been present for births, but absent for first words. He'd provided everything except presence. His children had learned, one by one, the same lesson he'd learned as a child. Dad's work comes first. They'd learned not to ask for too much, not to expect too much, to understand that success requires sacrifice, and they were part of what was being sacrificed. He told himself that providing for them was loving them, that giving them a good life meant building a successful career, that they'd understand when they were older, that they'd be grateful for the opportunities his absence had purchased. Some of them did understand. Some even said they were grateful. But understanding isn't the same as being unharmed by something. Gratitude doesn't erase the ache of a father who was always somewhere else. At 70, then 80, then 90, Clint watched his children parent their own children, and he saw them make different choices. Saw them leave work early for recitals, cancel meetings for soccer games, choose presence over advancement. And he realized they'd learned from his mistakes, but they'd had to be the mistakes to learn the lesson. They'd had to be the ones who waited for a father who didn't come, who hoped for attention that went elsewhere, who learned that even love has limits when it competes with ambition. They'd learned, but at what cost? But the deepest cut came from an unexpected source. At 85, Clint received a letter from his grandson, a young man he barely knew, despite sharing blood. The letter was polite, carefully worded, but its message was devastating in its simplicity. "Grandpa, I'm graduating college next month. I know you're busy. I know you have commitments, but I wanted to invite you anyway. Dad says you probably won't come, that you never came to his graduations either, that it's not personal, that it's just how you are. But I wanted to ask anyway, just in case." Clint read that letter 17 times. Each reading revealed new layers of pain. The grandson who called him grandpa but didn't know him. The son who'd learned to expect absence. The pattern repeating across generations like a genetic disease. That's just how you are. As if choosing work over family was a personality trait. As if prioritizing career over connection was an immutable characteristic. As if he'd been born unable to show up instead of having made 10,000 small choices that added up to permanent absence. He went to the graduation, made a special trip, cleared his schedule, and he sat in those uncomfortable bleachers and watched a young man he should have known walk across a stage. And afterward, when his grandson introduced him to friends, he saw the surprise in their eyes. "You have a grandfather," as if he'd materialized from myth rather than simply being too busy to be real. That night, alone in a hotel room, Clint Eastwood finally understood what he would change if he could go back to age 30. Not the career choice, not the missed dinner, but something deeper. If Clint Eastwood could go back to age 30, he wouldn't change the meeting he chose. He wouldn't turn down Rawhide or the Dollars trilogy or any of the opportunities that built his career. What he would change is the lie he told himself about why he was choosing them. At 30, standing in that apartment with a choice between a meeting and his father's birthday dinner, Clint told himself the choice was about career versus family, about building a future versus honoring the past, about opportunity versus obligation. But that wasn't the real choice. The real choice was about what kind of man he wanted to be, and he chose wrong. Not because he went to the meeting, but because he convinced himself that choosing the meeting meant family didn't matter, that pursuing success meant accepting absence, that being ambitious required being absent, that you couldn't be both successful and present, that the price of achievement was always paid by the people you loved. He built his career on that lie, and it became a self-fulfilling prophecy. If he could go back, he would make the meeting, would still take the role, would still build the career, but he would also call his father the next day, would drive up to Piedmont the following weekend, would have the conversation, even if the timing wasn't perfect, would show his father and himself that choosing one important thing doesn't mean abandoning other important things, that he would refuse the false choice, would reject the lie that you have to pick between success and connection, would understand at 30 what he only learned at 90. Presence isn't about quantity of time. It's about quality of attention. You can have a meeting and still call your father, can pursue a career and still show up for graduations, can build something meaningful and still be meaningful to the people who love you, can choose ambition without choosing absence. The one thing Clint Eastwood would change isn't a decision he made. It's the belief system that shaped how he made every decision afterward. The lie that said caring about career meant not caring about people. The false binary that cost him decades of connection he can never recover. And there's one more thing, one final revelation that brings it all together. 3 months ago at 94, Clint received another letter from his grandson, the same one who'd invited him to graduation years earlier, the one he barely knew. The letter said the grandson was engaged, planning a wedding, and there was a question: "Would you walk me down the aisle? Dad can't do it, he passed last year. And I know we don't know each other well. I know you weren't there for most of my life. But you're the only grandfather I have, And I want to give us both one more chance to be family. Clint sat with that letter for a long time. His son had died. The boy he'd been too busy to raise had grown into a man he'd been too busy to know. And that man had died, and Clint had missed his chance to apologize, to explain, to make it right. But here was one more opportunity, one more chance. A grandson offering grace Clint hadn't earned. He called immediately, said yes. And in the months leading up to the wedding, he did something he should have done decades earlier. He got to know his grandson, had dinner with him weekly, asked about his life, his dreams, his fears, his fiancée, his job, his hopes. And his grandson asked him questions, too, about his career, yes, but also about his regrets, his lessons learned, his wishes. If you could go back, his grandson asked one evening over coffee, what would you change? And Clint told him everything, the meeting, the missed dinner, his father's journal, the pattern across generations, the lie about having to choose between success and connection. His grandson listened, really listened. And when Clint finished, the young man said something that changed everything. Thank you for telling me, because I'm about to start my career, about to start a family. And I was already starting to believe the same lie, that working hard meant working constantly, that being ambitious meant being absent, that providing for family meant providing everything except presence. He paused. But you just saved me 30 years of regret. You just gave me the conversation your father never got to give you. And in that moment, Clint Eastwood understood something profound. You can't change the past, can't undo the missed moments, or recover the lost time, can't have the conversations that died unspoken. But you can break the pattern, can refuse to let your mistakes become someone else's inheritance, can offer the wisdom your regret has purchased, even though you wish you'd never had to buy it. The one thing he would change if he could go back to age 30 is the belief that drove all his other choices. But since he can't go back, he's chosen to do the next best thing, tell the truth about what that belief cost him, warn others who are standing at the same crossroads, offer the lesson he learned too late to use himself, but early enough to share with those who still have time. At the wedding, walking his grandson down the aisle, Clint felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not redemption exactly, you can't redeem the past, but purpose. The sense that maybe his mistakes hadn't been wasted if they could prevent someone else from making them. After the ceremony, his grandson hugged him, whispered in his ear, "Thank you for being here, thank you for showing up." And Clint at 94 finally understood what his father had wanted to tell him 60 years earlier. Showing up is the whole game. Everything else is just noise.
If Clint Eastwood could go back to age 30, he would tell that young man something simple but profound.
Your career will take care of itself if you're talented and persistent, but your relationships won't. They require deliberate choice, consistent presence, the willingness to show up even when it's inconvenient, especially when it's inconvenient. You can be successful and connected, ambitious and present, driven and loving, but only if you refuse the lie that says you have to choose. Don't wait 38 years to read your father's journal and discover what you miss. Don't wait until your children are grown to realize you barely know them. Don't wait until your grandson invites you to his wedding to understand that presence is the only gift that actually matters. Choose both. Build your career and build your relationships. Pursue your dreams and pursue the people you love. Work hard and show up hard. Because at 94, looking back across 60 years, Clint Eastwood knows one thing with absolute certainty. Everything you achieve will feel meaningless if you achieve it alone. Every success will taste like failure if no one who truly knows you is there to celebrate it. Every award will gather dust while the moments you missed, the birthdays, the graduations, the conversations, the simple presence, those will be what haunts you. The one thing he would change isn't a choice he made. It's the belief that made him think he had to choose it all. And if his regret can spare someone else that same pain, then maybe, just maybe, his mistakes weren't wasted after all. The crossroads you face at 30 isn't between career and family. It's between the person you think you need to be and the person you actually want to become. Choose wisely. Choose presence. Choose both. Because you can't go back, but you can still get it right. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for new stories And right where you watched it in the comments. See you in new stories.